It was a quiet evening, and I was in the kitchen, cooking dinner. I made Mark's favorite dish, spaghetti with garlic bread. I even set the table with candles and folded the napkins just right. I wanted tonight to feel special. I hadn't seen much of Mark lately, even though we lived in the same house. He was always busy, always on his phone or coming home late. But tonight I thought, maybe tonight will be different. The food was ready, the table looked nice, and I sat down to wait. The clock ticked loudly in the quiet room. 7 o'clock came, then 8. I sent him a quick text. Dinner is ready. But there was no reply. I waited, looking at the food on the table. It was starting to go cold. Finally, around 9, I heard the front door open. I felt a little spark of hope as he walked in. But he didn't even notice the candles or the special dinner I made. He just walked into the kitchen, looking tired, with his eyes on his phone. "Hi, Mark," I said, trying to sound cheerful. "Oh, hi, Ella," he replied. But he barely looked up. He sat down at the table, still checking something on his phone. I served the food, feeling my hands shake a little. I wanted to ask him about his day, to tell him about mine, but I didn't know where to start. Felt strange, like there was a wall between us. "How was work?" I asked, hoping he'd put his phone away. "It was fine," he said, not looking up. We ate in silence. I felt my stomach tighten with every bite. Why wasn't he talking to me? Why didn't he notice the effort I put into tonight? My heart started to hurt, and my mind was filled with questions. Was he angry with me? Did I do something wrong? After dinner, Mark got up and went straight to the living room. He sat on the couch, scrolling through his phone, and I cleaned up alone in the kitchen. I felt lonely, like I was the only one trying to make our home feel warm and happy. Over the next few days, things didn't get better. Every night, Mark came home late. He was always on his phone, always distant. He didn't ask me about my day, didn't tell me about his, and barely looked at me. I felt like I was fading away, like he didn't see me anymore. I started to think maybe it was my fault. Maybe I wasn't interesting enough for him anymore. I looked in the mirror one night, studying my face, my hair. Did I look old? Had I changed? I used to feel beautiful when he looked at me, but now I felt plain and invisible. I thought maybe if I tried harder, he would notice me again. The next day, I went out and bought a new dress, something bright and pretty. I also spent time on my hair, trying a new style. When Mark came home that evening, I waited for him to say something, to see me in the new dress. But he didn't say a word. He just walked past me, heading straight for the couch, where he sat with his phone. I felt my heart sink. All my effort, and it was like he didn't even see me. I wanted to scream, to shake him, to ask, "Do you still love me?" But I stayed silent, swallowing my pain. After that, I tried even harder. I cooked more of his favorite meals. I wore new clothes and makeup. I looked up hobbies, thinking maybe if I had new interests, he would find me more exciting. I tried everything, but nothing worked. He was still distant, still cold. Every night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering what I did wrong. Was it me? Was I too boring? Too plain? I thought back to the early days of our marriage, when he would look at me like I was his whole world. Now he barely looked at me at all. One night, I couldn't hold back my tears. I was lying in bed, facing the wall, feeling like a ghost in my own home. I heard Mark come into the bedroom, but he didn't say a word. He just got into bed, turned off the light, and went to sleep. I wanted to cry out, to ask him why he was acting this way, but I was scared of the answer. What if he didn't love me anymore? What if he didn't care? Days turned into weeks, and every day felt the same. I tried so hard to keep his attention, but nothing I did seemed to work. I felt like I was losing myself, like every part of me was fading. The more I tried, the less he seemed to notice. I was running out of ideas, and my heart was breaking a little more each day. Then, one evening, as I was cleaning the bedroom, I found a small box in his closet. It was dusty, hidden behind some old clothes. I felt a strange mix of curiosity and fear as I pulled it out. Inside, I found a stack of old letters, all written by Mark. The handwriting was familiar. The words looked hurried, like he had written them long ago, in another time. I knew I shouldn't read them, but I couldn't stop myself. I held the letters in my hands, feeling nervous. Part of me thought, I shouldn't read these. But another part, the lonely part, wanted answers. I needed to know what was going on with Mark, why he seemed so far away. I slowly opened the first letter. The paper was old and soft, with Mark's handwriting a little messy, like he wrote it quickly. In the letter, Mark talked about feeling unsure about his life. He wrote, "Sometimes I feel like I am lost. I don't know what I am doing." He didn't say these things to me, but here, on this piece of paper, he was open. I kept reading, feeling a mix of surprise and sadness. He had written about his worries, his dreams, and fears, things he never shared with me. I thought, why didn't he tell me? Why did he keep this to himself? Letter after letter, I read about the parts of Mark I never knew. He talked about how he sometimes felt trapped, like he wasn't where he wanted to be. He wrote about dreams he had when he was young, things he wanted to do but never did. There were even moments where he talked about not being happy, not feeling alive. I felt a pang in my chest. All this time, I thought he didn't love me, that I was the problem. But maybe he was just unhappy with himself. As I put the letters back in the box, my mind was full of questions. I thought about all the times he came home late, tired and silent. Maybe he wasn't angry with me. Maybe he was just lost in his own world of worries. I sat there on the floor, feeling sad but also a little relieved. For so long, I blamed myself. I thought, if only I was more interesting, more beautiful, he would look at me again. But now, I started to understand that maybe it wasn't about me at all. The next day, I decided to try something different. I wanted to talk to Mark, to let him know I was here for him. That evening, when he came home, I asked him about his day. I tried to smile, to show him I cared. But he only gave me a short answer and went to the couch with his phone, just like every other night. I felt my heart sink, but I kept trying. "Mark," I said softly, "is everything okay?" He looked at me surprised. "Yeah, everything's fine," he replied. But I could see in his eyes that he wasn't really telling the truth. He quickly looked away, his eyes back on his phone, as if he was hiding something. That night, as we lay in bed, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about the letters, about the things he wrote. I felt like I had a secret, something I wasn't supposed to know. But I also felt closer to him in a strange way, like I finally understood a part of him. I wanted to help, but I didn't know how. Every time I tried to talk to him, he closed off, like a door that wouldn't open. I started to feel frustrated, wondering if I could ever get through to him. Days passed and nothing changed. I wanted so badly to tell him, "I know you're struggling. I want to help." But I was afraid he would be angry or feel embarrassed. Maybe he would think I was spying on him. I kept waiting for the right moment, but it never came. The silence between us felt heavier every day, like a wall that was growing taller and taller. One evening, I sat alone in the kitchen, looking at our empty table. I thought about how happy we used to be, how we used to talk for hours, laughing about silly things. Now we barely spoke. It was like we were strangers living in the same house. I felt a tear roll down my cheek, and I quickly wiped it away. I missed him, the old Mark, the one who made me feel loved and important. I thought again about the letters and wondered what he was feeling now. Did he still feel trapped? Did he still have dreams he couldn't reach? I wanted to understand, to be the person he could talk to, but I didn't know if he would ever let me in. Finally, one night, I gathered my courage. I knew I couldn't keep waiting for him to open up. I had to make the first move to show him that I cared. After dinner, I sat next to him on the couch. My heart was pounding, and my hands felt cold. But I looked him in the eye. "Mark," I said softly, "I know you're going through something. I can feel it." He looked at me, his face showing a mix of surprise and confusion. "What do you mean?" he asked, his voice quiet. "I know things haven't been easy for you," I continued, trying to keep my voice steady. "If you need someone to talk to, I'm here. I'm your wife, Mark. You don't have to go through this alone." For a moment, he was silent. I held my breath, waiting for him to say something, anything. But then he looked away, his expression closed off. "Ella, I don't know what you're talking about," he said. Standing up and walking out of the room, I sat there, feeling a mix of frustration and sadness. I had opened my heart, and he had just walked away. I didn't know what else I could do. After that night, something inside me felt broken. I had tried to reach out to Mark, to tell him that I was here for him, but he just walked away. Felt like my heart was heavy with all the words I couldn't say. I didn't know how much longer I could keep going like this. I was his wife, yet I felt like a stranger, like he didn't want me to be part of his life anymore. Days passed and I tried to go back to normal. I kept cooking dinners, kept cleaning the house, and kept pretending everything was fine. But deep down, I was still hurt. I felt alone in my own home, and no matter what I did, Mark stayed the same. Quiet, distant, and always busy with something else. One evening, as I was cleaning up in the living room, I found myself looking at that box of letters again. I had put it back in the closet after I first found it, but now, standing there, I felt drawn to it. I knew it wasn't right to read them again, but I needed answers. I needed to understand why he was acting this way. I took out the box and sat down on the floor. I opened the letters one by one, carefully reading his words. Each letter showed me a piece of Mark that I hadn't seen before. In one letter, he wrote, "I feel trapped in this life, like I'm stuck in a place I don't belong." Another letter talked about how he felt like he had lost his dreams, how he didn't feel like himself anymore. As I read these words, I felt my heart ache for him. I had been so focused on my own sadness, my own pain, that I hadn't realized he was hurting too. I felt guilty, like I had been too focused on myself. Maybe he wasn't ignoring me because he didn't care. Maybe he was lost, just like he wrote in those letters. The next day, I decided to try a different approach. Instead of talking about his feelings, I thought maybe we could spend more time together. Maybe if we did small things together, he would feel more comfortable, and maybe he would start to open up. That evening, when he came home, I suggested we take a walk after dinner. To my surprise, he agreed. It was a small step, but it gave me hope. We walked slowly down the street, the air cool and fresh. We didn't talk much, just walked side by side in silence. I wanted to say so many things, to tell him that I understood, that I was here, but I didn't want to push him. I decided to let the silence speak for itself. Over the next few days, I tried to keep these small moments going. I invited him to go on more walks, to sit outside together, and even to watch a movie one night. Sometimes he would join me, and sometimes he would say he was too tired. But each time he said yes, I felt a little closer to him, like the wall between us was starting to crack, even just a little. But despite these small steps, he still hadn't opened up. He still hadn't told me about his struggles, about the things he had written in those letters. I started to feel frustrated, wondering if he would ever let me in. I wanted him to talk to me, to share his heart with me, but it seemed like he was still hiding something. One night, after another quiet dinner, I found myself lying in bed, staring at the ceiling. My mind was full of questions, doubts, and worries. I kept thinking about those letters, about the words he wrote. It felt like I was carrying his pain along with mine, and it was getting harder to keep it all inside. I wanted to help him, but I didn't know how. I was trying so hard, but he still felt so far away. I lay there, listening to the quiet sounds of the night, feeling the weight of everything. I thought about all the moments we had shared, all the happy memories, and I wondered if we would ever get back to that. I wondered if we would ever feel close again, or if this distance would stay between us forever. The thought of losing him, of never feeling truly connected again, was like a heavy stone in my chest. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. I turned to him and said softly, "Mark, please talk to me. I can see that something is wrong. You don't have to go through this alone." He was silent for a moment, and I held my breath, hoping he would finally open up. But he just sighed and turned away, saying, "There's nothing to talk about, Ella. I'm fine." His words felt like a door slamming shut. I felt the tears welling up in my eyes, but I didn't let them fall. I lay there in the darkness, feeling a mix of anger, sadness, and helplessness. No matter how much I tried, he still wouldn't let me in. It was like he was building a wall around himself, and I couldn't find a way to break it down. The next morning, I woke up feeling exhausted. both physically and emotionally. I went through my day like a ghost, my mind filled with questions and doubts. I kept asking myself if I was doing the right thing, if there was anything else I could try. But each time I came up with the same answer. I couldn't give up. I loved him, and I couldn't walk away from him, even if he was shutting me out. That evening, as I was cleaning the kitchen, I looked out the window and saw the sun setting, casting a warm, golden light over everything. It reminded me of the early days of our marriage, when we were so close, when everything felt simple and happy. I missed those days, but I also knew that life had changed, that we had both changed. I realized that maybe this was just another challenge we had to face together. As I stood there watching the sunset, I made a decision. I wouldn't give up on Mark. I would keep trying no matter how many times he pushed me away. I would keep finding small ways to show him that I was here, that I loved him, and that he didn't have to be alone in this. Even if he didn't open up right away, I would wait. I would be patient, and I would keep fighting for us. With this new resolve, I put away the dishes and took a deep breath. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't ready to give up on my husband. Days went by and I kept my promise to myself. I would be there for Mark no matter how hard it was. I would wait, I would be patient, and I would try my best to bring us back together. Each day I found small ways to show him I cared. I would leave little notes for him on the kitchen counter. Notes that simply said, "I hope you have a good day," or "I love you." I cooked his favorite meals, and even though he didn't always seem to notice, I kept going. I hoped that one day he would see that I was here for him, waiting for him to open up. One evening, as we sat down for dinner, I decided to try asking him again. I wanted to keep it light, to make him feel comfortable. I looked at him and said, "Mark, do you remember when we used to talk about our dreams? We used to talk about all the things we wanted to do." He looked up from his plate, surprised, but then he nodded. "Yes, I remember," he said, his voice quiet. I felt a spark of hope. "What happened to those dreams?" I asked gently. "Do you still think about them?" For a moment he was silent, and I thought maybe he would ignore the question. But then he took a deep breath and said, "Sometimes, I guess, but life is different now. I don't know if those dreams matter anymore." His words broke my heart a little. How could he say his dreams didn't matter? They were a part of him, a part of who he was. I wanted to tell him that his dreams were still important, that he was still important, but I didn't want to push too hard. I only nodded and said, "I understand." We finished dinner in silence, and I cleaned up the kitchen alone. My mind was full of thoughts. I felt sad that Mark had lost his dreams, that he seemed to have given up on them. I wondered if there was a way to help him find those dreams again, to make him feel alive. But I also knew I couldn't force him. He had to want it himself. That night, as I lay in bed, I couldn't stop thinking about his words. "Do you still think about them?" I had asked, and he had said, "Sometimes." I realized that maybe he hadn't given up completely. Maybe there was still a part of him that wanted to feel alive again. I just had to find a way to help him see that. The next day, I decided to try something new. I thought maybe if I showed him that I still had dreams, he would feel inspired to think about his own. I remembered that I used to love painting, something I hadn't done in years. I used to paint all the time, but as life got busy, I stopped. I went to the store and bought a set of paints, brushes, and a few canvases. When I got home, I set up a small area in the living room and began to paint. At first, it felt strange, like I didn't know what I was doing. But as I moved the brush across the canvas, I felt a sense of joy, a sense of calm that I hadn't felt in a long time. I lost myself in the colors, in the shapes, and for a while I forgot about all my worries. It was just me and the paint, creating something new. Mark came home that evening and saw me painting. He looked surprised, as if he hadn't expected to see me doing something like this. "You're painting?" he asked, raising an eyebrow. "Yes," I said with a smile. "I used to love it, remember?" He nodded, looking at the canvas. "I remember," he said softly. "You were always good at it." His words warmed my heart, and for a moment, I saw a glimpse of the old Mark, the one who used to notice the little things, the one who used to care. I felt a small spark of hope again. Over the next few days, I kept painting, creating more and more pieces. I could see Mark watching me sometimes, a curious look in his eyes. One evening, as I was working on a painting, he came and sat beside me. "Do you still love it?" he asked, his voice soft. "Yes," I replied. "It makes me feel alive." He nodded, looking thoughtful. "I haven't felt that way in a long time," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. My heart skipped a beat. This was the first time he had opened up even a little. I looked at him and said, "It's never too late, Mark. You can still find that feeling." He sighed, looking down at his hands. "I don't know. Sometimes I feel like I'm just stuck, like I don't know who I am anymore." His words hit me deeply, and I felt a wave of sadness for him. I reached out and held his hand, giving it a gentle squeeze. "You're still the same person, Mark. The same person with dreams and hopes. You just have to remember them." For a moment, he looked at me, his eyes filled with something I hadn't seen in a long time. Maybe it was hope, maybe it was relief. I wasn't sure, but I knew that something had changed, even if it was small. That night, I went to bed with a strange feeling, a mix of sadness and hope. I knew we still had a long way to go, but for the first time, I felt like there was a small light at the end of the tunnel. Mark had opened up, even if it was just a little. He had admitted that he felt lost, that he didn't feel alive. And maybe, just maybe, I could help him find his way back. In the days that followed, I kept painting, and I kept encouraging Mark to think about what made him happy. I didn't push too hard. I wanted him to take his time. But every now and then, I would ask him small questions like, "What did you love to do when you were young?" Or, "Is there something you always wanted to try?" Sometimes he would answer, and sometimes he would just smile and shake his head. But I could see that he was thinking, that he was starting to look inward, to remember the parts of himself that he had hidden away. Each day felt like a small step, a tiny piece of progress. I knew we weren't there yet, but I could feel that things were changing, that Mark was slowly opening up. And for the first time in a long time, I felt a sense of hope. I felt like we might find our way back to each other, piece by piece, day by day. One evening, as I was cleaning up after dinner, I noticed Mark sitting alone in the living room. He looked lost in thought, his gaze focused on the floor. I took a deep breath, feeling that tonight might be the night to really talk to him. I had been patient for so long, but now, I felt like it was time for us to have an honest conversation. I walked over to him and sat down beside him on the couch. For a moment, we just sat there in silence. I could feel my heart beating, and I was nervous, but I knew I had to speak. "Mark," I began softly, I think we need to talk." He looked up at me, his eyes tired and a little sad. "Talk about what?" he asked, his voice low. I took another deep breath. "About us, about how things have been," I said, choosing my words carefully. "I know you've been going through something. I can see it. You don't have to do this alone." He looked away, and for a moment, I thought he was going to ignore me again, like all those times before. But then he sighed, and I saw his shoulders relax a little. "I don't know what to say, Ella," he admitted. I don't feel like myself anymore. I feel lost." His words made my heart ache, but I was glad he was finally being honest with me. I reached over and took his hand, holding it gently. "Mark, I understand," I said softly. "Life can be hard, and sometimes we lose our way. But I'm here. I want to help you, to be there for you. We can get through this together." He looked at me, his eyes filled with a mixture of sadness and relief. "I didn't want to worry you," he said. "I thought I could handle it on my own. I didn't want you to see this side of me." I squeezed his hand. "But that's what marriage is about, Mark. We're a team. When you're sad, I'm here. When I'm sad, you're there for me. We don't have to hide things from each other." He nodded slowly, and I could see that my words were starting to reach him. I felt a small sense of hope, like we were finally breaking down the wall that had been between us for so long. "There's so much I wanted to do," he said quietly. "So many dreams I had. But now, I don't know if any of it matters." I shook my head gently. "Your dreams do matter, Mark. They are a part of you and they always will be. Maybe life took us down a different path, but it's never too late to dream again. You can still find what makes you happy. He looked at me, a hint of doubt in his eyes. But what if I've already lost too much time? It's never too late, I replied firmly. You're still here, and you still have a chance to find joy, to do the things you love. We can do this together. For a long moment, he didn't say anything. Then he let out a deep sigh, as if he was letting go of something heavy. I'm scared, Ella, he admitted. I'm scared of failing, of trying and not being enough. His honesty touched me, and I felt tears welling up in my eyes. I reached out and hugged him, holding him close. It's okay to be scared, I whispered. But you don't have to do this alone. I believe in you, Mark. I believe in us. We sat there in each other's arms, and for the first time in a long time, I felt truly close to him. It was as if all the silence and distance had melted away. He was letting me in, showing me his fears, his worries. I felt honored that he was sharing this with me, that he was finally opening up. After a while, he pulled back and looked at me, a soft smile on his face. Thank you, Ella. I don't know what I would do without you. I smiled back, feeling a warmth spread through my chest. We're in this together, I said, and we'll find our way, no matter what. Over the next few days, things started to feel different. Mark was more present, more engaged. He would sit with me in the evenings, sometimes just talking, sometimes in comfortable silence. We started going on walks again, taking time to enjoy the small things together. I could see that he was still struggling, but he was letting me be a part of his journey, and that made all the difference. One day, as we were sitting outside, Mark looked at me and said, "Maybe I should try something new. Maybe it's time to find a new dream." I nodded, my heart full of encouragement. I think that's a wonderful idea, I said. What have you always wanted to do? He thought for a moment, then smiled. I always wanted to learn how to play the guitar. It's something I thought about when I was younger, but I never had the chance. I felt a surge of excitement. Then let's do it. We can find a class or some lessons, and you can start learning. He laughed softly, a real, genuine laugh that I hadn't heard in a long time. You make it sound so easy, he said, shaking his head. It is, I said with a smile. It's never too late to try something new, and I'll be here, cheering you on. Over the following weeks, Mark started taking guitar lessons. At first he was shy about it, but soon he began to enjoy himself. I loved watching him practice, his face focused, his fingers trying to find the right chords. I could see a spark in his eyes, a sense of purpose that had been missing for so long. With each day that passed, he seemed to come back to life, bit by bit. He wasn't just my husband. He was Mark, a man with dreams, a man who was finding himself again. Seeing him grow, seeing him feel joy, filled me with a happiness I hadn't felt in a long time. One night, as we sat together, he looked at me and said, "Thank you, Ella. You never gave up on me, even when I felt lost." I held his hand, feeling a deep warmth in my heart. "I never will," I said. "We'll always have each other, no matter what." We sat there in the quiet, feeling a sense of peace, of closeness that I had missed for so long. I knew that life wouldn't always be easy, that there would be more challenges ahead. But now I also knew that we could face them together. As I leaned my head on his shoulder, I felt a deep sense of love and gratitude. We had found our way back to each other, and no matter what the future held, we would face it side by side. Life felt different now. Mark was slowly coming back to himself, and I could see that he was happier. He spent time each day practicing his guitar, and the sounds filled our home with music. It wasn't always perfect. He hit the wrong notes sometimes, and he would laugh and start again. But each time he played, I saw a spark in his eyes, a light that had been missing for so long. It was beautiful to see him so alive. I felt a happiness, too, something I hadn't felt in a long time. For months, I had felt so alone, wondering if our marriage was falling apart. But now it was as if we had found each other again. I felt closer to him, not just as my husband, but as a person with dreams and hopes. We were sharing our lives in a new way, and it made everything feel brighter. One weekend, Mark surprised me. He had been practicing a song on his guitar, and he asked if I would sit and listen. My heart felt warm as I sat on the couch watching him prepare. His fingers shook a little, and he looked nervous, but he took a deep breath and began to play. The melody was simple and soft, but it filled the room with a sense of peace. As he played, I felt my eyes tear up. It was such a beautiful moment, hearing him play something he had learned himself, something he had worked so hard for. When he finished, I clapped, and he laughed, looking a little embarrassed. "It's not perfect," he said, shaking his head. "It was perfect to me," I said, smiling. "I'm so proud of you, Mark. You followed your dream, and you made it happen." He looked at me, his eyes full of gratitude. "I couldn't have done it without you, Ella," he said softly. "You never gave up on me, even when I felt like giving up on myself." I felt a deep sense of joy hearing those words. I knew we had come a long way, and I was grateful for every step, every moment that brought us back together. I took his hand, holding it tightly, and we sat there, feeling the happiness of that simple moment. As time went on, we found new ways to keep our connection strong. We spent time together, going on walks, talking about our dreams, and sometimes just sitting in comfortable silence. I kept painting, and Mark kept learning new songs. Our home felt alive, filled with color, music, and laughter. It was like we had found a new way to love each other, a deeper way that went beyond words. One evening, we sat outside watching the sunset. The sky was painted with shades of pink, orange, and gold, and everything felt peaceful. Mark looked over at me, a soft smile on his face. "Do you think we would have made it through this if you hadn't found those letters?" he asked, his voice thoughtful. I thought about it for a moment, remembering how those letters had changed everything. They had opened my eyes to his struggles, to the parts of him that he had kept hidden. "I think we would have found our way," I said finally. "But the letters helped me understand you better. They showed me what you were going through." He nodded, looking down. "I'm glad you found them," he said quietly. "I was scared to tell you how lost I felt. I thought I had to handle it alone, but now I know I don't have to." I reached out and held his hand. "You never have to be alone, Mark. We're a team, and we'll always be there for each other, no matter what." He looked at me, his eyes full of love. "Thank you, Ella. You've shown me what it means to truly love, to never give up." Hearing those words filled me with a sense of peace. We had come a long way, but every step was worth it. We had faced our fears, our doubts, and our pain, and we had come out stronger. I knew there would still be challenges ahead, but now, I felt ready to face them with him by my side. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a golden glow over everything, I felt a deep sense of gratitude. I was grateful for the journey we had taken, for the love we had found again, and for the strength that had brought us through the hardest times. From that day on, we promised to always be honest, to never hide our struggles from each other. We promised to share our dreams, our fears, and our hopes, knowing that we were stronger together. We were a team, and no matter what came our way, we would face it side by side. Life moved forward, and we continued to grow, both as individuals and as a couple. Mark kept learning new songs on his guitar, and I kept painting, filling our home with color and music. We found joy in the little things, in the moments that made each day special. And whenever we faced hard times, we remembered this journey, the journey that brought us back together, that showed us the true meaning of love. We knew that love wasn't just about happiness. It was about standing by each other, even when things got hard. It was about never giving up, about always believing in each other no matter what. In the end, our love was stronger, deeper, and more beautiful than ever before. And as we sat together, watching the stars appear in the night sky, I knew that we would be okay. We had found our way back to each other, and together we could face anything.